The CEO's wife invited a black cleaning lady to her lavish mansion as a cruel joke, laughing behind closed doors as she planned to humiliate her in front of powerful guests, but the moment the woman arrived, an unexpected truth began to unfold, the smiles froze, whispers turned to silence, and everyone realized this night would not end the way they imagined. What was meant to be an evening of luxury, champagne, and quiet cruelty became a moment that exposed arrogance, prejudice, and hidden histories. The black cleaning lady walked into that glittering room with calm dignity, unaware that she had been invited not out of respect, but to be mocked. As the CEO's wife watched confidently, believing she held all the power, something remarkable began to happen. The room shifted. Eyes widened. Conversations stopped. And within minutes, the very people who came to witness humiliation found themselves witnessing a revelation that would leave them stunned forever. Margaret Whitmore had spent her entire life surrounded by polished surfaces, marble floors that reflected chandeliers, mirrors that never showed a flaw, people who smiled only when it benefited them. As the wife of one of the most powerful CEOs in the city, she had mastered the art of appearing gracious while quietly judging everyone around her. To her friends, Margaret was charming, elegant, untouchable. To herself, she was bored. Bored of parties that all looked the same, bored of people who praised her without meaning it, bored of a life where nothing ever surprised her. That boredom slowly turned into cruelty. Margaret liked control. She liked knowing where everyone stood, who was above and who was below. And in her mind, some people were permanently below. The cleaning staff, the drivers, the invisible hands that kept her world spotless, she never bothered to learn their names. They were background noise. Necessary, but insignificant. That was how she first noticed her. The black cleaning lady worked quietly, efficiently, her movements calm and precise. She never lingered, never complained. Margaret had seen her dozens of times, bending over floors that never stayed clean for long, wiping fingerprints off glass that would be smudged again by nightfall. There was something about the woman's composure that unsettled Margaret. No fear. No desperation. Just dignity. And Margaret hated that. One afternoon, while sipping tea with her friends, laughter echoing through the living room, Margaret mentioned the cleaning lady in passing. The word slipped out easily, casually, wrapped in mockery. The women laughed. Someone suggested it would be fun to see her at one of their events, dressed out of place, surrounded by wealth she could never touch. The idea took root in Margaret's mind like a spark finding dry wood. A joke, she told herself. Just harmless entertainment. So Margaret extended the invitation. Across town, in a small apartment filled with quiet resilience, the cleaning lady, her name was Evelyn, read the invitation twice. Then a third time. Her hands trembled slightly, not from excitement, but from confusion. She had cleaned many houses in her life, including Margaret's, but never had she been invited into that world as a guest. Evelyn was used to being unseen. At 52, life had carved lines into her face, each one earned through sacrifice. She had raised children alone after her husband died young. She had worked double shifts, swallowed pride, and learned to survive without expecting kindness. Yet something about the invitation felt heavy. Evelyn knew how people like Margaret looked at women like her. She had felt it her whole life, dismissive glances, assumptions formed before she ever spoke. Still, she believed in walking forward with grace. If this invitation was a test, she would meet it with her head held high. She didn't own expensive clothes. But she owned one dress she had kept for years. Simple. Neat. Respectable. She pressed it carefully that night, her fingers lingering on the fabric as memories passed through her mind. Every struggle. Every loss. Every moment she chose dignity over bitterness. This is just another room, she whispered to herself. Just another door. The night of the party arrived dressed in excess. Margaret's mansion glowed with golden light. Valets lined the driveway. Laughter spilled into the night air. Guests arrived wrapped in tailored suits and gowns worth more than Evelyn made in a year. Margaret stood at the center of it all, smiling effortlessly, her eyes sharp with anticipation. She was waiting. In her mind, she imagined the moment Evelyn would arrive. The awkward stares. The whispers. The way the woman would shrink under judgment. Margaret imagined herself watching from afar, feeling powerful, amused, validated. This was her entertainment. The guests filled the room, voices overlapping in shallow conversation. Deals were hinted at. Status was displayed. Everyone knew their role. Margaret floated from group to group, checking the entrance again and again. Where is she? Evelyn stood outside the gates, her heart pounding louder than the music inside. She took a breath, straightened her shoulders, and stepped forward. The guards hesitated for only a moment before letting her in, guided by the list Margaret herself had approved. With every step up the long driveway, Evelyn felt the weight of eyes she hadn't yet met. Not fear, awareness. She had walked into spaces like this before, just never through the front door. Inside, the room buzzed with confidence and cruelty disguised as elegance. Margaret noticed the shift first. Conversations slowed. Laughter softened. Heads turned. Evelyn entered quietly, her presence unannounced but undeniable. She did not rush. She did not look down. Her posture was calm, grounded, as if she belonged to herself, regardless of where she stood. Margaret's smile faltered. This wasn't how it was supposed to feel. The woman did not look lost. She did not look ashamed. She did not beg for approval with her eyes. Instead, there was something steady about her, something that made people uncomfortable because it could not be controlled. Whispers rippled through the room. Isn't that? Why is she here? Who invited her? Margaret felt a flicker of irritation. She moved closer, ready to enjoy the discomfort she had planned. But as she approached, she noticed something else in the room, recognition. A man near the back stiffened, his drink frozen halfway to his lips. Another guest narrowed his eyes, studying Evelyn's face with a strange intensity. A woman clutched her pearls, her expression no longer amused but unsettled. Evelyn felt it too. The air had changed. She could sense it in the silence, in the way people looked at her not with ridicule, but with confusion, almost reverence. She folded her hands gently in front of her, her heart steady despite the weight of the moment. Margaret stopped walking. For the first time that night, she felt something unfamiliar crawl up her spine. Uncertainty. This wasn't humiliation. This was something else. Evelyn met Margaret's eyes, calm and unflinching. No anger. No fear. Just quiet strength forged by a lifetime of surviving without permission. In that moment, Margaret realized something terrible. She had invited this woman as a joke. But she had no idea who she truly was. And the room knew it too. The laughter was gone. The power had shifted. And the night was only beginning, **** major twist and conflict ****. The silence in the room stretched longer than comfort allowed. Margaret felt it pressing against her chest, a subtle but undeniable shift she could not explain. This was not the reaction she had rehearsed in her mind. There were no giggles, no sideways glances meant to embarrass. Instead, there was hesitation. Respect. Even fear. Evelyn stood near the entrance, her hands gently clasped, her breathing slow and controlled. She had learned long ago that when people went quiet around you, something deeper than judgment was unfolding. She didn't know what it was yet, but she could feel it in her bones. Then a voice broke the stillness. Soft. Shaken. Evelyn. A tall man stepped forward from the crowd, his expensive suit suddenly feeling too tight. His face had gone pale. Several guests turned toward him, surprised. This was Richard Hale, a board member of Margaret's husband's company. A man known for confidence, for command, for never being uncertain. Yet now his hand trembled. Evelyn lifted her eyes slowly. Her brows knit together as recognition sparked, not with shock, but with a deep, aching memory. "Yes," she said quietly. "It's been a long time, Richard." The room froze. Margaret's heart slammed against her ribs. She looked from Richard to Evelyn, her mind racing. This was not part of the joke. This was not part of the plan. You know each other?" Margaret asked, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow even to her own ears. Richard swallowed hard. "Know her?" he repeated, his voice low. "Margaret, this woman." He stopped himself, glancing at Evelyn with something close to shame. "This woman," he continued carefully, "saved my life." A ripple of shock moved through the guests. Margaret's smile cracked. "What do you mean, saved your life?" she asked, her tone sharp now, defensive. Richard exhaled, as if opening a door he had kept locked for decades. 30 years ago, before the money, before the titles, before any of this, he gestured weakly around the room. "I was nothing. I was a reckless young man who thought he was invincible. One night, after a factory shift, I collapsed outside a bus station. Heart condition. Undiagnosed. No one stopped. No one cared." His eyes returned to Evelyn. "Except her." Evelyn lowered her gaze slightly, not out of shame, but humility. "Anyone would have helped," she said. "No," Richard said firmly. "They didn't. You did. You stayed with me for hours. You called an ambulance. You held my hand when I thought I was dying." A woman gasped. Glasses clinked nervously as guests shifted. Margaret felt the floor tilt beneath her. Richard continued, his voice thick now. "I asked for your name that night. You told me. I promised I'd never forget it." He laughed bitterly. "And then I did. I built a life that rewarded me for forgetting people like you." The room was no longer watching Evelyn. They were watching Margaret. Her cheeks burned. That's touching," she said quickly. "But surely that doesn't explain." Another voice interrupted her. "This isn't the first time." An older woman stepped forward, her posture rigid with disbelief. "Evelyn Carter," she whispered. "From the Southside Community Center." Evelyn looked up, surprised. "Mrs. Langston?" The woman nodded, eyes shining. "You ran the night literacy classes. You taught my son to read when the schools gave up on him." She turned toward the guests. "My son is a federal judge now." A stunned murmur swept through the room. Margaret's breathing grew shallow. One by one, people began to speak. A doctor who remembered a woman who stayed with patients no one else wanted. A non-profit director who recognized the volunteer who worked without recognition. A city councilman who owed his scholarship application to a woman who believed in him when no one else did. Each story peeled away another layer of Margaret's illusion. This was not a cleaning lady who had wandered into the wrong room. This was a woman whose quiet influence had shaped lives that now held power. Margaret felt exposed. Small. Her joke had turned into a mirror. "No," Margaret snapped suddenly, her composure cracking. "This is ridiculous. She cleans houses. That's her place. Whatever she did in the past doesn't change what she is now." The words hung in the air like poison. Evelyn flinched, not outwardly, but inside. It was a familiar wound, reopened. Richard turned sharply toward Margaret. "What she is now," he said coldly, "is the reason half the people in this room are standing where they are." Margaret's voice rose. "You're all being dramatic. I invited her out of kindness." Evelyn finally spoke again, her voice calm but firm. "No," she said. "You invited me to be laughed at." Every eye snapped to her. "I've been laughed at before," Evelyn continued. "I've been ignored. Dismissed. Reduced to what I do instead of who I am. I accepted your invitation because I believed, perhaps foolishly, that people could still surprise me." She met Margaret's gaze directly. "And tonight, they did. Just not the way you hoped." Margaret's hands clenched at her sides. "You think you're better than us now?" she hissed. Evelyn shook her head slowly. "No. I think I'm equal. And that's what frightens you." The conflict erupted then, no longer quiet, no longer polite. Guests began to question Margaret openly. Whispers turned into pointed conversations. Her cruelty, once hidden behind charm, stood naked under the chandelier lights. Margaret felt her control slipping. This was her house. Her world. And yet she had never felt so powerless. Her husband, the CEO himself, had been silent until now. He stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "Is this true?" he asked Margaret quietly. "Did you invite her to mock her?" Margaret opened her mouth, but no words came. Silence answered for her. The CEO turned to Evelyn. "I owe you an apology," he said. "Not just for tonight. For a system that allowed someone like my wife to believe dignity is determined by occupation." Margaret's eyes widened. "You can't do this to me," she whispered. But it was already done. Evelyn felt the weight of the moment settle. This was the conflict she had lived her whole life, seen versus unseen, valued versus dismissed. She did not raise her voice. She did not demand revenge. She simply stood in truth. "I didn't come here to take anything from you," Evelyn said gently. "I came because I believed in grace. But grace does not mean silence." She picked up her coat. "I won't stay where my humanity is a joke." As she turned to leave, the room parted for her. No laughter. No mockery. Only respect. Margaret collapsed into a chair, the illusion of superiority shattered. For the first time, she understood the cruelty of her own reflection. The major twist was complete. The woman invited to be humiliated had become the most powerful presence in the room, not because of money, but because of a life lived with purpose. And the conflict left behind something far more painful than embarrassment. Truth. The moment Evelyn turned toward the door, something in the room fractured. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic in the way movies made drama obvious. It was quieter than that, far more dangerous. It was the sound of power slipping out of hands that had never learned how to hold it responsibly. "Wait." Margaret's voice cut through the air, sharper than she intended. Heads turned again. Eyes narrowed. No one smiled now. Evelyn stopped, her hand resting lightly on the strap of her worn handbag. She did not turn immediately. She had learned, through years of quiet endurance, that hesitation could sometimes force truth to rise on its own. Margaret stood from her chair, her movements stiff. Her carefully curated image was unraveling thread by thread. This was her house. Her party. Her rules. And yet, none of it seemed to matter anymore. "You don't get to walk out like this," Margaret said, forcing steadiness into her tone. "You don't get to turn my home into a courtroom and leave us standing here like villains." Evelyn turned slowly. Her eyes were calm, but there was something behind them now, resolve, sharpened by years of swallowing moments exactly like this. "I didn't put anyone on trial," Evelyn said. "I just showed up as myself." A murmur rippled through the guests. Margaret laughed, short and brittle. "Oh please. Don't act innocent. You knew exactly what you were doing." Evelyn tilted her head slightly. "What was I doing, Margaret?" Using her name felt deliberate. Equalizing. Margaret hesitated. You came here knowing you'd cause a scene. No, Evelyn replied softly. I came here because you invited me. Everything else happened because people chose to speak the truth. The CEO stepped forward again, his jaw tight. Margaret, he said quietly, this has gone too far. She spun toward him. You're taking her side now? Her voice cracked. After everything I've done for you, for this company? For my image, he corrected. Not for my values. The words landed hard. Margaret's face flushed. She's manipulating all of you, she insisted, desperation creeping in. She's playing the victim. Evelyn inhaled deeply. This is the turning point, she said, not loudly, but clearly enough that every corner of the room heard her. Right here. Where you decide whether dignity is something you give, or something you recognize. Margaret scoffed. You think you're teaching us a lesson? No, Evelyn said. Life already did. I'm just the reminder. The tension became unbearable. Guests shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware that their silence, their laughter earlier, their complicity, was now part of the story. Then another voice spoke. Young. Nervous. I need to say something. A junior executive stepped forward, a woman Margaret barely noticed most days. I watched you plan this, she said, her hands trembling. The jokes. The messages. The way you laughed about how uncomfortable it would be. Margaret stared at her. You're exaggerating. I'm not, the woman replied. And I didn't stop you. That's on me. The confession cracked something open. Others followed. I laughed, someone admitted. I said nothing. I thought it was harmless. I didn't want to lose favor. Each sentence tightened the room like a knot. Margaret backed away, shaking her head. This is unbelievable. You're all turning on me because of her. No, Richard said firmly. We're turning toward ourselves. Margaret's breath came faster now. She had never been confronted like this, not without money, not without power to shield her. She looked at Evelyn, her eyes blazing. What do you want? She demanded. An apology? Money? Recognition? Evelyn's expression softened, not with pity, but with something heavier. I want you to understand, she said. Because if you don't, this will happen again. To someone else. Somewhere else. Margaret laughed again, but this time tears streamed down her face. You think understanding changes anything? Yes, Evelyn replied. It changes everything. The CEO stepped beside Evelyn, not above her, not in front of her. My wife invited you here to humiliate you, he said aloud. That is the truth. And I will not excuse it. Gasps filled the room. Margaret whispered, You're destroying me. No, he said quietly. Your choices did that. The turning point was complete. Margaret collapsed back into her chair, her strength gone. For the first time, no one rushed to comfort her. No one defended her cruelty. The room had shifted allegiance, not to Evelyn alone, but to accountability. Evelyn felt a strange mixture of relief and sorrow. Victory was never clean when it involved human failure. She walked back toward the center of the room, not to claim attention, but to close the wound properly. I forgive you, she said to Margaret. Margaret looked up sharply. Don't, she snapped. Don't patronize me. It's not for you, Evelyn replied gently. It's for me. She turned to the guests. And I don't want applause. I want memory. Remember this feeling the next time someone is invisible to you. The room stood still. Then Evelyn did something no one expected. She thanked them. For listening, she said. For speaking. For choosing truth, even when it was uncomfortable. She walked toward the door again. This time, no one stopped her. The guests parted silently, respectfully, as she passed. Not a single laugh followed her. Not a single mocking glance. Outside, the night air was cool. Evelyn exhaled, her shoulders finally lowering. She had not raised her voice. She had not begged for dignity. She had claimed it. Inside the mansion, nothing would ever feel the same again. And that was the true turning point, not just for one night, but for every life in that room that would never again be able to say, "I didn't know." Powerful ending. The mansion stood unusually quiet after Evelyn left. The music had been turned off. The laughter that once filled every corner now felt like a distant memory, almost embarrassing in its absence. Guests lingered, unsure whether to stay or go, each of them trapped inside their own thoughts. The night that was meant to celebrate power and status had transformed into a reckoning none of them could escape. Margaret remained seated beneath the chandelier, staring at nothing. The room that once bowed to her presence now felt enormous and cold. For the first time in her life, she was not being watched with admiration, but with awareness. And awareness was far crueler than judgment. Her husband stood a few steps away, hands clasped behind his back. He looked older somehow, as if the truth had added weight to his shoulders. "This party is over," he said calmly, his voice carrying authority without anger. "Please go home." No one argued. One by one, the guests quietly collected their coats and left, avoiding Margaret's eyes. The doors closed behind them with soft finality, each one sounding like a verdict. Soon, only 3 people remained in the room. Margaret, her husband, and the echo of Evelyn's dignity. Margaret finally broke the silence. "You humiliated me," she whispered. He turned to her slowly. "No," he said. "You revealed yourself." She stood abruptly, her composure finally collapsing. "You chose her over me." "I chose truth," he replied. "And tonight showed me how long I've ignored it." Margaret opened her mouth to argue, but nothing came out. Because for the first time, she knew excuses would not save her. Power hadn't protected her. Wealth hadn't shielded her. And cruelty, once exposed, had nowhere to hide. Upstairs, the mansion lights dimmed automatically, as if the house itself was ready to sleep through its shame. Across town, Evelyn rode the bus home. The city lights blurred past the window as she rested her hands in her lap. Her heart felt heavy, but calm. She had not gone there seeking justice or revenge. She had gone because she believed silence should never be the price of dignity. She thought of her late husband, of the nights she worked until her feet burned, of every moment she had swallowed insult after insult just to survive. Tonight had not erased those years. But it had honored them. A young woman sitting across from her smiled nervously. "I saw you on the news feed," she said softly. "Someone recorded part of it." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "Did they?" The woman nodded. "People are talking. They're calling you brave." Evelyn smiled faintly. "I was just honest." When she stepped off the bus, the air felt lighter. She unlocked her apartment door, the familiar scent of home wrapping around her like a promise. Tomorrow, she would wake up early. Tomorrow, she would work. But something inside her had changed forever. She was no longer invisible. The next morning, headlines flooded the internet. Elite party exposes cruel joke gone wrong. Cleaning lady's dignity shocks city's most powerful. When silence broke, truth walked in. The CEO issued a public apology. Donations were announced. Diversity committees were formed. Statements were made. But the real change did not live in press releases. It lived in conversations. Office workers questioned jokes they once laughed at. Executives remembered names they once ignored. Doors opened, slowly, imperfectly, but opened nonetheless. Margaret watched it all unfold from the quiet of her bedroom. For the first time, the mirrors in her home did not flatter her. They reflected something she could no longer deny. She did not lose her wealth. She did not lose her house. She lost something far more unsettling. Illusion. And without it, she had to face herself. Weeks later, Evelyn returned to work. But something was different. People greeted her by name. They held doors. They listened. Not out of fear, but respect. One afternoon, a letter arrived in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single sentence written in careful handwriting. Asterisk, you changed the way I see people. I am trying to change too. Asterisk. Evelyn folded the letter and placed it in her drawer. She did not need to know who sent it. Change did not need credit. That evening, she stood at her window, watching the city breathe. Lights flickered on and off in distant buildings, each one holding stories like hers, some unheard, some waiting for the courage to be told. Evelyn whispered a quiet truth to herself, the kind only experience could teach. Power does not come from standing above others. It comes from standing in truth, even when you stand alone. And somewhere, in a mansion that would never feel the same again, silence finally learned its lesson. Because dignity, once seen, can never be unseen.